Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving deep into the art and philosophy behind the art of Verenart.
Yeah.
And we've got two great sources for this one. We've got a collection of her paintings from her website, Verenart, really creative. Mm-hmm. And then we also have, thankfully, her artist statement, which is going to give us, hopefully, some insight into her thoughts as we're looking at these pieces.
Yeah. Always nice to get like a direct line into the artist's brain.
Exactly.
When you're looking at their work, because otherwise it's just, you looking at it and you projecting, all your own stuff onto it.
Exactly.
So this is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and I think she gives us a really kind of provocative statement right off the bat.
Okay.
She says, art is life. Life is art. Which is super interesting, I think, when you think about it.
It is, yeah. Like, where do you even go with that?
Where do you begin?
Right.
Right. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, from your perspective, when we're thinking about art, is she saying that art imitates life? Mm-hmm. Or is she saying that life itself is art? How do we even begin to unpack that?
Well, and I think, you look at her work and it's very abstract in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like she's necessarily trying to directly mirror, like, images from the real world, right? It's more about, I think, those internal emotions and feelings and ideas. Mm-hmm. So in a way, it's almost like she's saying that by tapping into, like, your own internal experience, whatever that might be, you are kind of engaging in this act of creation, right? And so in that sense, like, life itself becomes a form of art because you're constantly, growing, changing, evolving, experiencing new things.
Right. And she even says, she called these chapters of me emotions, thoughts, feelings, inspiration.
Yeah.
So it really is about, like, those internal states and how do we express those.
Exactly.
All right, well, let's jump into Verenart here.
Yeah, let's take a look.
And to see if we can maybe kind of unpack some of these ideas as we're looking at these pieces. So the first one, this yellow abstract, is slide 1 if you're following along at home.
Okay.
This one really struck me just in terms of, like, the energy, right?
Yeah.
It feels very vibrant, very playful. What are you seeing here?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, you talk about energy. It does feel, like, very energetic. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I'm also seeing there's, like, these geometric shapes, right?
Yeah.
You've got these diamonds and squares and triangles kind of, like, interspersed with this almost, like, chaotic background.
Right.
So there's, like, this interesting tension between, like, structure and then this kind of, like, free-flowing energy.
Yeah, and even that splash of red too, right?
Oh yeah.
In the upper left-hand corner, it's just like it's like this little, like, exclamation point.
Exactly.
It's just kind of like boom.
Yeah, like, look at me. And that actually reminds me, there's this theme that Verenart talks about a lot in her work, which is structured chaos.
Oh, interesting.
And it's this idea that, like, within chaos, there's also structure, right? Mm-hmm. And that those two things aren't necessarily opposed to each other.
Right.
They actually kind of, like, play off of each other.
Right. And maybe even need each other, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
To exist.
And I think you can see that in this painting, right?
Yeah.
Where you have that kind of, like, wild, energetic background, but then those geometric shapes kind of, like, ground it and give it a sense of, like, order.
Right.
So it's like both things are happening at the same time.
Okay, and then slide 2, we've got this red abstract, which is a completely different feeling, I think.
Totally different vibe, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But again, you get that sense of energy.
Oh, absolutely.
It's
that palpable.
It's so intense. It's visceral. Like, you can, like, feel it.
It's like it's emanating off the canvas.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Like, red is such a powerful color. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, like, what does this particular shade of red, like, evoke for you?
It's interesting. When I look at this, I actually think of courage.
Oh.
It's like that feeling of, like, your heart pounding and, like, you're about to do something that maybe you're a little bit afraid of.
Yeah.
But there's also this, like, excitement to it.
Right.
Like, you're ready to, like, face the challenge.
That's so interesting because, I think for a lot of people, red is associated with, like, anger or, like, danger. Mm-hmm. But I love that you're seeing courage in it.
Yeah.
Because I think that speaks to, like, the power of abstract art, right?
Right.
It's like, it's not telling you what to think.
Right.
It's inviting you to bring your own experiences, your own interpretations.
Yeah.
And so, like, whatever you bring to it is valid.
That's so true. All right, well, slide 3, let's move on. We've got green and red abstract.
Okay.
And I feel like, again, she's shifted gears here.
Yeah, completely different.
Right.
Yeah.
We've gone from this very like free-flowing to this very intense, and now we've got these like very bold lines, sharp angles.
Yeah.
There's like a tension here
Totally.
that I'm really kind of drawn to.
Yeah, I mean, you can almost like feel the clash happening on the canvas, right?
that's
like the green and the red, they're not blending, they're like right up against each other.
Right.
And it creates this like really interesting visual effect.
And again, it made me think of that idea of contrast and harmony, right?
Yes.
Like because you have these two colors that like you wouldn't necessarily think would go together,
Right.
but she's made them work.
Yeah, and they're not in harmony in the sense of like being peaceful.
Right.
They're in harmony in the sense of like they're both there and they're both contributing to the overall effect.
And they're both necessary, I think,
Exactly.
for it to work, right?
Yeah.
If you took one away, it wouldn't
Totally.
it wouldn't have the same impact.
Yeah, it would be totally different.
Okay, so slide 4. This is interesting. Yellow abstract texture,
Okay.
and it just feels so different
It does.
than what we've been looking at, right?
Yeah, it's much softer, wouldn't you say?
Yes, very soft, very
Dreamlike.
almost. Yeah, exactly.
Like, and I think the texture has a lot to do with that, right?
Oh, yeah, for me.
Like those brush strokes are so much less defined. It's almost like the colors are like blending into each other.
Yeah.
And it creates this like really beautiful sense of movement and fluidity.
Okay, now we're on slide 5, abstract flowers, and like now we're getting a little bit of like the outside world coming in, maybe.
Yeah, there's definitely like a hint of something recognizable here.
Right.
Which we haven't really seen in the other pieces. And, you know, it's interesting because, you know, nature is another one of those big themes that Verena explores a lot in her work. And it makes me wonder, like, is she referencing a specific type of flower here?
Right.
Or is it more about, like, the feeling of flowers?
Yeah.
Like, what does it evoke for her?
Right.
And I think that's part of what's so fun about abstract art is that, you know, there's not necessarily a right answer.
Right.
It's really up to the viewer to decide, like, what they're seeing and how it makes them feel.
All right, well, we are on our last slide here.
Okay.
Slide 7.
Wow.
This red and blue abstract really struck me.
Yeah, it's very different.
It's very anatomical, I think,
Yeah.
when you look at it.
Yeah, it does have that, like, almost like biological feel to it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And such a stark contrast, again, between the red and the blue.
Yeah, and the shapes are really interesting too, right?
Yes.
They're very organic.
Very organic, yeah.
Like, they almost feel like they could be cells or organs or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fascinating piece, for sure.
It is. It's very striking.
Yeah, it feels very different from her other work, but it doesn't feel out of place in her collection either.
Right.
Like, it still feels like quintessentially Verena somehow.
Exactly, yeah.
And, you know, speaking of different facets of Verena, I know that she's not just a visual artist, she's also a dancer.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And that she even uses movement as a way to, like, create art and teach art. So I'm curious, like, how do you think that plays into everything we've been talking about?
Well, I think it's so interesting how, like, you know, she's working in these two very different mediums.
Right.
But they both go back to that idea that, you know, art is life. Life is art. Because, like, dance is such a, like, embodied experience, right? It's all about, like, how you're moving through space and the stories that your body is telling. And so, in a way, it's like your whole life becomes a form of art.
Right. And it makes you wonder, like, is her dance influenced by her painting or vice versa?
Yeah. I mean, do they feed into each other? Like,
Right.
Are they two sides of the same coin?
Yep.
Or are they completely separate expressions for her?
Right.
And I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's a fascinating question to consider.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Well, I think this has been a really, I don't know, I've learned so much.
Yeah.
Just from looking at these few paintings with you and kind of getting your insights into, you know, structured chaos and contrasts and harmony and how she uses nature and this idea of rebirth.
Yeah, and I think the biggest takeaway for me is just that, you know, art is so personal. And there's no right or wrong way to experience it.
Right.
And, you know, Verena's art is just like one example of like the infinite ways that people can express themselves.
Right.
And so I think like a good question for our listeners to think about is like, what stories do you want to tell?
Ooh, I like that.
You know, like what's your inner world look like?
Yes.
And how could you express that through art?
Right. right? Whether it's through painting or dance or, any other form of art, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, well, that is a beautiful note to end on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And we will see you all next time.